Welcome back, Jesus Loving Logger friends. Today, I'm going to get out of prophecy. There's so much more prophecy we could go into, and there's a lot of it that's currently happening right now, but I could just stay in prophecy for forever. There's so much of it, but I want to go to a new subject now, and it's archaeology. So archaeologists have always found reasons to prove that the Bible's true, and even the ones that don't believe it, that are looking for reasons to refute the Bible, they've only ever found proof for it. They've never found anything against the Bible. Even when they think they got something like a civilization that never existed, they end up digging up that civilization. So archaeology is a great proof. And today I'm going to talk about I'm going to begin by talking about Noah's Ark and the flood and the proof that we have that that was real. So I'm sure most of you have heard the story of Noah's Ark as a kid, you know, your bedtime story or something. But anyway, for those of you who might not have heard of it, who are newer to the idea, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis, about chapter 6 and 7 and 8, God talks to Noah. He was the one righteous man left on the earth, and his family. There was 8 of them. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. And God said that the world had become corrupt. So I'm going to read you a little passage out of the Bible so you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to skip around to a few different verses, but When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of human were beautiful, and they married any of them that they had chosen. This resulted in what was in verse 4 called the Nephilim, who were on the earth in those days. The Nephilim was a result of a human woman and the sons of God, which were the fallen angels that fell with Satan. They decided that they would start mating with women. Didn't know that was in the Bible, did you? So anyway, they had Nephilim. It wasn't a human offspring. It wasn't an angel offspring. It was something that was never supposed to be. And anyway, they called them Nephilim. They turned out to be giants. I don't know if they were like 40 foot tall or 13 foot tall, but if you do a search on giant skeletons found, there's actually quite a few of them found, and it gets covered up a lot. Interesting. If you and there's only this one piece of the Bible that talks about the Nephilim. Not to go too deep into the Nephilim, but there's a book of Enoch, which is not in our Bible, but it's referenced in Jude chapter 1, verse 14, I think. It just talks about the book of Enoch, which it makes it seem like a relatively credible source. And it's called an apocryphal book, meaning it's extra, like an extra hidden knowledge is what apocrypha means, I think. But anyway, it's a book that some people reference because it gives more information about certain things like Watchers and the Nephilim in this case. You can read more about them. And it's treated like a history book, like a man-made history book. It's credible, but it's written by man, so it's not God-breathed. That's why it didn't deserve a spot in the Bible, but it was a reputable book. And beware, though, there's, I think, 2nd Enoch and a 3rd Enoch, and those are pseudepigraphal books, meaning pseudepigraphal means that somebody put the name Enoch, but it wasn't Enoch who wrote it. I think it was in 200 AD that the 2nd and 3rd Enochs were found, or at least the 2nd. So here's a timeline behind me. If you can see that, Adam and Eve right here, the very first 2 people on earth. And then you come down to the 9th generation, and that's Noah. I believe it was 9th generation. And here's Enoch. So Enoch was the great-grandfather of Noah. And anyway, we're going to talk about Noah's Ark. Well, Enoch was right in that time when all the things were happening with the angels and the women. And I don't think the women were okay with it. I don't think it's like they went out and had a little marriage ceremony. I think it was a forced thing. It wasn't meant to be. So the book of Enoch, if he did make some kind of notes, it would have been up in here. And then you come around several hundred years later to 2348 years BC, which was 1,656 years after Adam and Eve. So the world had been around for 1,656 years. So back here was the book of Enoch. And then if you come all the way down to right here is 0 BC. And that's why we have our calendar. That's pretty incredible, by the way, right? Did you guys notice that? In our calendar, it's BC and AD. And we all knew what BC and AD meant, and now they're trying to call it BCE, before Common Era, instead of before Christ, but we all know what it means. And then the AD, I always used to think it meant after the death, but it's ad dominium or something like that. But anyway, it's based on when Christ was born, you know. So our calendar is based on Jesus. Everybody that I know uses a calendar, and when you write the date of something, you're actually writing the date based on Jesus's life. That's pretty good credibility for that being real too. But anyway, as I was getting to, so at 0 down here, that's a long ways from Enoch, and it was actually 200 years. So right here, 200 years is when second and third Enoch, I believe, were written, or at least second Enoch. I'm not sure about the third, but they're fake books is what I'm saying. They're pseudepigraphals. They don't even know who wrote them. They think some Jewish guy wrote them and kind of expounded on what he thought Enoch should say, but it's not written by Enoch. But I think the book of First Enoch was based on writings from Enoch probably, but even that was man-made, and you know, if it wasn't in the book, it wasn't meant to be in the Bible. So don't think it's like something that maybe should have been in. People get into that mindset of, well, maybe there's a missing book from the Bible. God is all powerful. Whatever he wanted in the Bible is in the Bible. Okay. So I'll finish reading a couple other things from Genesis. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil. And it also says later in the Bible that when times get like that again, that's when Jesus is coming back again. So it says as it was in the days of Noah, it's talking about this. Like maybe not only that all mankind had become evil in their heart, but that when the sons of God, when the angels had the Nephilim with the women, that was changing DNA. It wasn't human DNA anymore, and you see a lot of push for things like that. You know, artificial intelligence, DNA changing and splicing. It's called CRISPR 9 or 6, or I don't know. You guys probably know what I'm talking about on the gene splicing thing. And okay. Now the earth was corrupt and full of violence. All people on earth were corrupt in their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy them and the earth. He's talking about all of them and all of the earth here. So don't fall for any of the, it was a small flood. It was a worldwide flood, it says. Make for yourself an ark of cypress wood. And I'll skip here down to chapter 7. It says in verse 2, take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal and 1 pair of every unclean animal. So, and it says kind of animal. So there's a whole study on that, but you're thinking to yourself, like, there's so many animals in the world. How could he have brought a pair of all of them? But it says every kind of animal. So for example, what I understand that to mean, as I've learned about it, was like a dog. You know, he didn't take like a poodle and a Labrador and a German Shepherd. You know, all dogs came from one species called the dog. You know, so he took the original dog, and then from then on, there's been microevolution. Don't hear evolution like macro Darwinian evolution. That's almost a faith-based structure in itself, or it is. They think that God didn't create, that evolution created. And Darwin himself said in his book, The Black Box, I think is the name of his book. I think at the very end of his life, he said, I still haven't found any of these crossover specimens, links, or whatever you would call them. Like basically a man walking around with a fishtail, because, you know, it went from one cell in the water to a fish, and then the fish crawled out of the water with some arms and legs, and then it turned into a monkey that was part fish, part monkey, and then the monkey turned into part man, part monkey. And well, they've never found any of those. They thought they did one time, the link, and it was like they found a skull of a chimpanzee like 50 miles away from the skeleton of somebody who had rickets, like a disease in their back or something. They're all hunched over. And so they took this skull from 50 miles, or I don't know, it might not have been all of 50 miles, but it was a long ways away. And they said, you know, these kind of fit together. But they did a DNA test later, and one's from a monkey and one's from human. So this link, this little thing they put together, the hunched over, what we think caveman looked like or whatever, that link they were so proud of, they debunked that. But anyway, so Darwinian macroevolution thinks that there was just this big bang, and then a bunch of little cells turned into whatever, that millions and billions, and they just keep tacking on millions and billions of years. When they can't explain something, they just give it a few billion more years, you know, but that's not what God's word says. But microevolution is true. Like I was talking about, the dogs might have started out as more wolf-like dogs, you know, or herding type dogs, or I don't know what they had back then. But, you know, over time, breeding different dogs with in amongst the dog species, they got like designer dogs now. And, you know, Moses didn't have like designer dogs on his ark, okay? So he just had a pair of dogs. And anyway, going away from that, just so you don't think he had like 42 billion different kinds of animals on the ark. And it was possible. Another thing about the book of Enoch I wanted to say, for its credibility, like God didn't want it in the Bible, or it'd be in the Bible. God can do it. He can make whatever he wants to make happen. God's omnipotent, all powerful, and all sovereign. He can make anything or anyone, you know, he has power over it. So he didn't want it in the Bible, but with some credibility to Enoch and its historicity, like I say, it's man written, so there could be errors in it. Don't ever read it thinking there couldn't be, but it was found, parts of it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Essenes, a sect of Jewish people, well respected, they took care of all the writings in the libraries in the temple. They put it away with the rest of the Bible. Well, there was a lot of other writings too, aside from the Bible, but the Old Testament has been found, you know, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We'll talk more about that later. That's part of it, this archaeology thing. But anyway, so that's the story. Okay, now I'm telling you the story just so you kind of got a background idea. I might have went a little off from what I needed to tell you. Basically, the world got really bad. Mankind became very evil. God got angry, said, I'm going to destroy the world with flood, and which he did. And then later, he gave the rainbow, and that's what the rainbow stands for. It doesn't stand for any of the stuff that people are trying to, or I should say Satan is trying to make it stand for today, because God gave the rainbow as a promise that he would never flood the world again, but he might, you know, completely burn the world again someday. Anyway, that's another subject. Okay, so you got the story, Noah's flood. And now you're going to say, what's the proof of Noah's flood? Had we found the ark? Well, I researched that quite a bit, and there is claims that very, very early pilots flying over Mount Ararat have, because that's where the Bible says it landed, very early pilots claim that they saw a boat or some giant house-like structure up on the top of Mount Ararat. They said there was a sharp like cliff, and it was right up on the edge, up on top of that. And anyway, there's a village at the bottom of Mount Ararat, and they said in like 1890, I believe, a lot of the people, like the whole town back then, just knew it was a thing, and they thought the whole world knew. They're like, everybody knows about Noah's Ark, and it's up there. And they said as kids, the older people that were still alive when they were interviewed said when they were kids, their parents would take them up there and look it over, and they could crawl up on top of it, and they looked inside and they saw some compartments, but I think the back of it was broke off or something. You know, there's like heavy snow up there. Snow loads might have broken apart or fallen rocks, or maybe it rolled down at some time. But now they can't see it, but there's a glacier called the Parrot Glacier, I think is, if I understood it right. And they think that's kind of covering it up. And as the glacier moves, it might push it along. And you're like, well, man, that's pretty important. Why haven't archaeologists went and looked? Well, they're not allowed. There's been like a 30-year-long battle going on there between Turks and the Kurds. And like if you go in and you're not Kurdish, the Kurdish people kill you. If you're not Turkish, the Turkish people on the other side will kill you. So you can't even get near this mountain because there's constant battles going on. And I can't remember how long ago, but the Turks actually sent a bomb up on Mount Ararat at some time because they thought their enemy might be hiding up there. So they blew up a bomb right around the area where this ark was thought to be, and they think that might have caused a rock slide also that might have covered it up. So the pictures I just showed that possibly show the ark or where it might be located are at 15,500 feet on Mount Ararat, up toward the very top. And there's another site much lower that a lot of people think might also be the ark, because there's a boat shape in the ground kind of protruding, and it's at 7,000 feet, and it's more easier to get to. And in I think the 1960s, Ron Wyatt went and looked the site over and got an archaeological thing going on there to try to prove that was the site, and he truly believes that's it. So Randall Price is the nowadays expert on Noah's Ark, and he doesn't think that's the site. He thinks my first photos of the top of Mount Ararat were, and he's the one that explained about the glacier and the bomb going off, and he says now it's not, you're not able to go up there. But anyway, early on, this other site at 7,000 feet, much lower, where the grass is growing and there's no glacier and it's in the shape of a boat, that earlier on, that was the first suspected possible site of Noah's Ark. Anyway, there was actually wood retrieved from the area that dates it a little bit older than the Ark was, I believe. It was dated at like 4,800 years old, the wood was. And anyway, but they said it might carbon date differently, covered in pitch too. So I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist. I don't know which of the sites might be the right one, but pretty interesting stuff. And I tend to think that the very first place flooded world would start seeing land would be the very top of Mount Ararat versus 7,000 foot. You'd be able to see and go land your boat pretty easily if there was almost 8,000 foot of ground, 8,000 foot mountain sticking out of the ground where you landed, if that were the case. So I'm thinking probably the top, but I don't know. Just some proof that's pretty interesting towards it. So some of the proof for the flood itself, which there's a lot of proof for the flood itself, but how about squid fossils at the top of Mount Everest? How can you get a sea creature fossilized on the top of an extremely high mountain? Well, you can't unless it was underwater at one time. But many marine fossils are in almost every layer of rock in the Grand Canyon walls. Fossils like clams, coral, sea lilies, crabs, and squid. Fossils like these are found all over the world on almost every continent, or it says on every continent. I don't know if they've found fossils in Antarctica yet or not, not sure, but it says they've been found on every continent. The fossils from this time were preserved with exquisite detail, meaning that it had to be a quick and extreme burial situation. Think of thousands of perfect jellyfish fossils. It's only possible if a live jellyfish was quickly covered up. A jellyfish fossil can only happen if it's really quick, because a jellyfish, when it dies, something usually either eats it or it decays really fast. It melts in the sun. It said it would have had to happen within a day. And there's whole graveyards of jellyfish like perfectly covered up in some of the sandstone. There's no sign of many years of time between different rock layers like geologists say that it would have had to happen. The evidence would have been at least like plant roots between the layers. So you got one layer of rock and then plants, and life happens for 1,000 years, and then it gets covered up, and then there should be multiple things between those layers that you can find, but there isn't. They said not even plant roots. So all these layers just got laid down all at once when it was washing away from one area, and then water would wash some from a different area, and you can trace it. Like there's chalk rock cliffs in England, I think it was, and these chalk formations, they're native to that area. The ground itself, everything made up is this chalk stuff, but you can find this chalk like hundreds of miles away from that site, and you can test it, and it had to be the chalk that came from there. As far as the Grand Canyon, that's one of the greatest evidences too. The Colorado River could never have carved something that huge out. It's like an unbelievable, we can't even imagine it, amount of dirt and rock that got taken out of there. And it wasn't just little Colorado River just washed it down and out, because you've never seen any other river be able to do that. And some of those layers, it's not just all soft material. There's a lot of different kinds of stone in all those layers. There's areas of, like I said, specific rock, like I talked about the chalk example. Well, there's in the Rocky Mountains, for example, is known for having quartzite boulders. It's like native to that area. That's where these boulders were made, all the ground around it, that's where these boulders came from. And you can tell that all the boulders that are still there that are quartzite, like you can look at the ground and see the makeup and understand why those are there. But you find these boulders 400 to 600 miles away from the Rocky Mountains, where they don't belong. And they're smooth from traveling, like water washing them away, Like if you go to a river rock and pick it up, it's smooth because the water sits there and rolls it around in the sand, and it smooths the rock out. Well, if these rocks were 400 to 600 miles away, but they originated in the Rocky Mountains, how do you think they got washed? It wasn't a couple little rainstorms that could wash a giant boulder away. It had to be some catastrophic, unbelievable flood. And I heard about this, and then I started noticing. You never notice things till you start looking for them. But if you're just driving around out through the flat plains, and then all of a sudden there's just a few big rocks, like they look like they're out of place. We were headed to Reno a while back, and I look out, and like out in the middle of this flat, just had some trees around, and then all of a sudden there's just a couple giant rocks. And I'm like, how did those giant rocks get there? The dirt didn't erode out from around them because they're above ground level, So somehow those rocks moved to that location at some point in time. So that was probably during the flood time. That's pretty cool. Okay, there's some stories that go along with the flood that are pretty awesome proof too. Okay, so the flood, I don't know if I completely explained it. God told Noah to make an ark. He gave him the dimensions, told him to get the animals on it. And then God actually closed the door of the ark for Noah and then started the flood. For 150 days, water came up from the deep, it said. So from underground, water came up for 150 days. And then for 40 days and 40 nights, there was an extreme flood from above. It says the floodgates of heaven were opened up. And anyway, then after that, you can imagine how long it takes for water to recede. It took quite a while for the water to recede. So they're actually in the ark for close to a year, I think it was, before they actually got settled down and out of the ark. And anyway, so while the water is receding and washing all these sedimentary layers, and all that's happening, and the rocks are probably flowing around, like they get out and the whole world was destroyed. No animal except what was on the ark, or sea life, obviously sea life, was able to survive. And if something could survive in the water, they didn't have to take that on the ark. That wasn't part of it. But there was only 8 humans to repopulate the rest of the earth. So that's why it gets skinny right here. So the world's happening, God gets mad, and he pinches it off right here, and it starts all over with Noah and his family right there. So all the rest of the world starts expanding this timeline just from those 8 people. So if those 8 people repopulated the whole world, you would think the whole world would know about this story, right? Not just Christianity and Judaism. Well, there's proof. Like every human group from all over the place, there's 300, at least 300. I've heard 500, but I can only find the 300 proof. Different stories about Noah's Ark. There's actually a book out called Echoes of Ararat, and it tells these 300 different stories from all these different people groups that all match up. So I'll just read you a few, just a random few. There's, like I said, about 300 stories. Okay. So there's a Babylonian account that said that there was giants before the flood. I told you about the Nephilim earlier, right? Said there was giants before the flood who were depraved. And one man who was wise and followed God, named Noah, lived with 3 sons, Sim, Japhet, and Shem, and their wives. So the names are a tiny bit different. It might have been the way their spelling worked, I don't know. But the names are a little bit different, but you still get the story. It's Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. And it says they built an ark, and 78 years later, water burst forth from below with many days of violent rain. All humans were destroyed, but Noah and his family on the ship, which ended up on a mountain. So all of that lines up. A Chinese account called Hiking, and I think it's Hihking, Hi. Anyway, it's Hiking. It's all one word, I think. Spoke of a man named Fuhi. They said that he, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives escaped a great flood that destroyed the earth. These 8 people repopulated the world after a violent catastrophe. In an ancient Chinese temple, there is a wall painting of Fuhi's boat with a dove flying toward the boat holding an olive branch in its beak. And that's significant too. That's part of the Noah's Ark story. After the waters started receding, Noah sent a raven out to see if it would come back, and the raven left. Then he sent a dove out, and the dove came back with an olive branch in its beak. Well, that means it finally found some land, and there was an olive tree at the top of wherever it found the land. So to be able to bring the olive branch back, they had hope that, land was starting to show up. Anyway, that's part of the story, and that's significant that in that Chinese account, that was also part. A Hawaiian account said that long after the death of the first man, everyone on earth but one were wicked. So long after Adam and Eve, there was one good man left on earth and everybody else was wicked. The good man's name was Nuhu. This man made a giant canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The water rose and killed all those on the boat, which was also his family with it. Killed all but those on the boat, which was also his family with him. 8 people. The Toltec Indians of ancient Mexico have a story that the first world lasted for 1,700 years, then was flooded and destroyed. The flood covered the highest mountains. A man named Tapi, who was very pious, was told by the Creator to build a boat to survive. He took a pair of every animal. Eventually, Tapi let a dove go to see if it was dry enough. After it dried up and people repopulated the earth, they built a tall, great tower to protect themselves from any other flood. But everyone's language became different, and this caused confusion. So the people traveled to different parts of the world. So that's got the story of the flood and the Tower of Babel account in with it. Sumerian tablets tell us of a golden age when all spoke one language, but then God confused it. Babylonians said that gods destroyed the temple tower and scattered them abroad and made their speech strange. Those are some extra stories about the Tower of Babel. So these stories all line up with the Genesis account in some way. You can tell that, like, from China to our Bible to, the Indians, it's amazing that they all have basically the same story, that the world was destroyed at one time with a flood and the 8 people survived. So an interesting fact about the Chinese language, they used pictographs. I don't think they use as many pictographs anymore, but there still is some, and a picture is made up of symbols that represent things. So interestingly, there's quite a few examples of this, but I'll just give you one. Large ship, the pictograph for it is made up of 3 other pictographs, and the 3 other pictographs are of the number 8 plus people plus boat. So 8 people in a boat is what large ship pictograph breaks down into. And there's actually quite a few, if you look it up, there's quite a few examples of this. I think that's pretty awesome too. So their language has Noah's Ark embedded into it. All right, I think that's about all I have to say about the archaeology that has to do with the flood account. I'd like to take you to a dig site before I let you go. I have a couple archaeologists in my backyard digging up some stuff, so I thought I'd take you out and show you what a real archaeological dig looks like. Let's go out. Well, here's the archaeological dig site I told you I'd take you to. It's out in my backyard. It's my kids. And anyway, tell me a little bit about this archaeological work you're doing.
Well, every single day, we try to come out here a lot to dig it up, and we usually take some water over here so that way it loosens it up.
Okay.
It's always really hot.
Okay.
Sometimes we squirt ourselves with the water.
Very windy
Sometimes
today.
It's windy.
Okay.
Like today.
What do you think, Brant? What do you think about the situation out here?
It's kind of dangerous.
Dangerous?
There's wasps.
Oh yeah, dangerous. Sometimes archaeologists, like if you ever watch Indiana Jones, you gotta be in danger. Can you guys show me your dig site a little bit?
So, we have some paintbrushes.
Are these rocks anything special?
No, we just dug them.
Those are just rocks?
They're rocks that we dug up from here.
Okay, and you got brushes out here and a shovel, and this is how you put the water in the hole, huh? With the water gun?
We use the water gun to only use a certain amount.
Okay. So what do you guys think you have down in here?
Like a maybe velociraptor?
I do see the eye socket right there. And when you guys get this velociraptor skull out, what are you going to do with it?
Sell it.
You're going to sell it for how much?
$1,000.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool. Don't you already have something from a dinosaur? You just got you have part of your archaeological digging stuff here.
Yeah.
What'd you get? What is it?
A T-Rex tooth.
A T-Rex tooth. That is awesome. So you're going to have a T-Rex tooth and a velociraptor skull once you get this all dug up. Man, that's a pile of dirt you guys have dug. All right, well,
baby mouth shots.
thank you guys very much for your interview. I wish you luck on your dig site.
Thank you
And
very much.
I will talk to you later.
Bye.
Say, bye, Jesus loving logger family.
Bye.